You're tuned into the Unnecessary Harm podcast, where we drill down on issues of substance use and its cultural impact. Your host, Shane Barco, Executive Director of the Delgado Institute, with over 40 years experience in youth and community work and a passion for building resilience.
Welcome back to the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Good to have you with us. If you're visiting for the first time, welcome on board. Good to have you here. And of course, as always, to our subscribers and friends, good to have you back with us. Well, today's guest is no stranger to us here at the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Gary is the current president of Drug Free Australia and heads up OVM's One Voice, One Message scientific committee and is the vice president thereof. He is a research fellow of note and, importantly for today's conversation, one of the founding authors of the declaration we're going to share. This very timely and authoritative document comes at a moment he and his co-authors describe as a global drift away from prevention, a drift that should never happen in my mind. The declaration reasserts a principle they argue has been quietly abandoned. And that principle is that under the Article 33 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which, by the way, is the most widely ratified human rights treaty in history, children have a legal right to a drug-free environment on the same footing as their protection from exploitation and trafficking. Emerging from the Wake Up Drug Free is a key conference in Eindhoven in March 2025, the declaration sets out 7 recommendations that reject the normalisation of drug use and place prevention at the heart of drug policy where it always should be. As a researcher with over 40 years on the front line of debate, Gary brings the argument for repositioning prevention where it should be, at the centre of the human rights, alongside the research history and irrefutable evidence that supports it. Gary Christian, welcome back to the Unnecessary Harm podcast, my friend.
Good to be with you, Sean.
Brilliant. Good to have you here. It's been a while. Look, before we drill down into the declaration and the key factors in it and the salient points and the mastery of it, it's a great document. It'd be good to give our listeners a little bit of context because many people listening today will not have heard of it. This will be new to them. Where does it come from? What's context? And tell us about the birth of this declaration. We all know prevention's been drifting off the public square for a long time. We know that both nationally and internationally. But what were some of the catalysts for getting this momentum, this campaign up and running?
So about 3 years ago, we started a international organisation called One Voice, One Message. Now, I'm the vice president of that organisation. And around the same time, one of our members on the board of that organisation, Jo Baxter, also from Drug Free Australia, as I am, she was talking a lot about the rights of the child. And a lot of that was just going over my head. I thought, rights of the child are important. But at that time, I thought it's best that I look into it. And so I got hold of a booklet from the World Federation Against Drugs. And it was something they published back in 2012, and it was on the rights of the child. And when I got through the 100+ pages of that, read it cover to cover, I was totally convinced that the rights of the child were being totally overridden by the United Nations itself. There were players within the United Nations that were trying to get rid of, practically speaking, get rid of this right of the child to live without drugs in their environment at all. This talks about their parents and friends, whatever. A drug-free environment. That's what the convention was pushing.
Wow. So it's interesting because the United Nations, as you know, we're involved with the UN as well, and the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime has got some very clear statements on prevention and very clear statements on rights of the child. But you're right, it's incredible to watch some of the actors that have infiltrated in spaces and actually got hands on the levers of policy interpretation. Talk to us a little bit. I don't want to get too much into that space because we're seeing that in most political arenas that he who has the microphone makes the rules, or at least makes the interpretation of the rules. So we're seeing a lot of that in across the board in all sorts of policies. But when the UN, which is particularly the Office of Drugs and Crime, which is supposed to be looking after families and communities, is starting to be wobbly on this, that's a real concern. So what are some of the because obviously that's not a United Nations straight up statement, we want to get rid of prevention. It's not that what they're saying then. But what's sort of happening there? What are the subtleties that have been introduced there, Gary?
Yeah, so particularly since 2008, a number of billionaires in this world, George Soros being one of them with his Open Society Foundation, have been putting money into the United Nations. All right, so they've become a co-funder of certain aspects of the United Nations, and with that, they hope to get privileges. Now, George Soros is on record in his book, Soros on Soros, page 200, back from the year 2000. He says, I want to get rid of any laws against illicit drug use.
Yeah.
He said, maybe we allow crack cocaine to be sidelined, but all the rest should be legal and available from shop fronts. Okay, so that's his ideology. Now, he's trying to force that into the United Nations along with Branson,
Richard Branson, yeah, I knew that, yeah.
And you've got a whole cabal of them. And they actually in 2016 got the whole World Economic Forum on board with this project. And particularly in 2018, that's when they started their work on the United Nations, specifically targeting particular agencies within the United Nations and getting them to come on board with drug legalization. Now, I said that, drug legalization, that's what they want.
Yep.
They call it the regulation of drugs, but they've got 4 United Nations agencies and the High Commission against the High Commission for Human Rights. All right, now this is the commission that is the guardian of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but they are trying to get rid of it by overriding it with new rights. They believe that there are new rights. A drug user has the right to use drugs, and the rights of the child should go to a backward spot where they no longer hold any sway within the international community.
Yep. That is really interesting because I remember 2016 we did a submission, Delgado along with Drug Free Australia, others as well. We made a significant submission on that space because we knew that the drivers were there, and there was, I think, $20 million thrown at the UN, or at least not at the UN, but perhaps at the cause that Soros and Branson and others had conjured, that they were really working hard to lobby and basically pay for advocacy to be done. We've
got to remember, Shane, that back in 2018, I think it was 2018.
Yep.
Soros put $19 billion, that's with a B, wow. $19 billion into his social agendas. Now, that is a hell of a lot of money. You know, that would fund quite a lot of member states of the United Nations, their entire GDP. So he put that amount into his social agendas. And, of course, that money is being contributed to be able to overrun the United Nations.
Yeah, it's a subversive act, and it's really concerning. And I think that's one of the reasons why, again, clearly why this particular declaration needed to be created and, again, reinforced in the public square. Now, the Article 33, I really want listeners to get this, because there is, without going into too much of the detail, because we could spend a long time on how, but happy for you to spelunk this if you want to, Gary, because this is your wheelhouse. But as you said, some groups have come in using United Nations labeling, United Nations logos, United Nations rhetoric, as if they were United Nations representatives, and they are not, have created policy platforms and policy frameworks, again, using retasked, I would say cleverly retasked evidence to present, as you said before, the rights of the drug user to be this, incredibly important thing, that to use illicit substances in a recreational way should be the right enshrined in law, and anything gets in the way of that is draconian and archaic and should be removed, including then the United Nations rights of the child. So let's talk about that. That particular convention, Article 33, Gary, tell our listeners how important that is and what that means for communities.
Okay, so Article 33, I think, there may be 50 odd articles in there. I haven't really looked to see the total, but you've actually got Article 33 embedded with others, 32, 34, 35, Article 35, 36, 37, 38. All of those are protecting a child from slavery. I think that's Article 35. Protecting them from child exploitation, Article 34. Article 33, protecting them from the illicit use of drugs. All right. So when you're talking about protecting them from the illicit use of drugs, what the Soros operatives have tried to do is they've got to the High Commission on Human Rights and they've said that should be interpreted as just preventing them. So we're going to educate children. It's not about protecting them in the same way from slavery or somebody imposing something on them. But you look at every use of the word protect in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, it is always an outside force which is being played upon a child, which is negative. And they have to, it's saying you need to commit, as nations who sign on to this, you need to commit to making sure that you protect your children from any illicit use of drugs, not them using it, not prevent them from use of drugs. Yes, it may be included, but protect them from other people harming them because they're using drugs.
Precisely. And that's the nuance that they're trying to manipulate. And that's the beauty of all, spun ideology that is crafted by bad actors who want to, again, anyone who actively, and I'm going to have my little moment here, actively advocates for the use of psychotropic toxins for pleasure, for hedonistic purposes, for getting high, getting stoned, getting wasted. We're not talking about self-medication for trauma through whatever means, which has now become the centre point of a lot of these arguments. But people just want to get off. And I'm willing to burn families, burn children, burn communities just to do that. And so that they have to reword that. They have to present themselves in a way that's slightly palatable. They have to reword the whole thing. That's what they've been trying to do, is actually recraft the entire thing to make it sound like it's, well, hey, we agree children should be protected, but hey, we need to educate them. We need to, give them the education resources so they can make a better decision. But let us just get on with it. And of course, as if the adult population has no influence over what's happening in the culture and the emerging generation that's coming through. So I want to talk to hit that again, Gary. Governments should use all means, it's part of the all means possible to protect children from the use of harmful drugs and from being used in the drug trade. That's one of the clear statements. So that's pretty unambiguous. Governments should use all means possible to protect children from the use of harmful drugs. So that's the use anywhere, on any occasion, on any environment, from being used, and of course being used even worse in the drug trade as mules, which we're seeing a lot more of that happening. Yeah. So what is it about, from your perspective, tipping into this, we're going to talk about the contents of the declaration in a moment. One of the statements you made to me, I think at Vienna earlier this year is that, and I thought it was amazing, that harm reduction or harm reductionists, those for pro-drug and those who are anti-drug both agree on one fact, is that drugs cause harm.
Yes.
So they want to reduce harm. They acknowledge, even the pro-drug activists state clearly that drugs are harmful. They do harm, and we should try and reduce the harm. Of course, Delgado has a clear statement on that. We have been minimising harm by maximising prevention for 160 years, so we know prevention is the best way to reduce harm. But let's talk about that mechanism as harm reduction being another tool to hijack the agenda away from prevention. And what's that look like, and how does the Eindhoven Declaration address that?
Yeah, so look, what they've done is very clever in the harm reduction lobby. They have pretended that the harms of drugs, yes, they admit that they harm the user, they just sideline everybody else that gets harmed by drug use, all right? So how many other people might get harmed by drug use outside of the user? They would say, oh, we don't know. We don't know. Our focus is on the user. But I can tell you who else is harmed. So you can look at the person who is the partner of the drug user. You can look at the children of the drug user, which is the rights of the child, of course. You can look at the children's grandparents. There are enough horror stories of grandparents. I work with Sue Urban, who heads up the Grandparents Association for Australia. These are the ones who look after their kids, all right? Their own children who are addicted, look after their kids. They call it
kin care, don't they? Kin care.
Yeah, kin care. So you've got the grandparents, you've got the siblings, you've got workmates, you've got friends, you've got other road users, you've got people in the community. All of these people are harmed by drugs. The harm reduction lobby says, oh, no, it's just harms to the user. We don't want to talk about the rest. And yet, when you look at those harms, we put together for the CND, the Committee on Narcotic Drugs,
Commission on Narcotic Drugs,
this last March, we put together a special publication, and it was particularly looking at what the harms to the children alone. Forget about the partner, the domestic violence, forget about in this case, the grandparents and the harms done to their incomes and the fact that they don't get a retirement. This was just the child. We were looking at the harms to the child. And the sort of harms that we saw when we went in and did the US statistics, and we put in some Australian ones as well, but mainly from the US, we found that 1 in every 840, now keep this figure in your head, 1 in every 840 kids in the US was orphaned
Wow.
in the year 2021 alone. Okay,
Wow.
so they had 100,000 overdose deaths, and we had 80,000 plus kids that were orphaned. They were left without a parent or a caregiver.
Let's just stop. Let's just pause. Sorry, Gary, you're on a roll.
Yeah.
Let's pause. Listeners get this. I want you to hear this. I want to emphasise this. Over 80,000 kids without parents because of recreational drug use.
Absolutely.
And the right way, so-called advocates for this. Keep going, Gary. Keep going.
Yeah, so if we want to be exact, 86,000 kids lost their parent or a caregiver to drugs. And over the last 20 years, 1 in every 175 kids have lost their parent or caregiver and been orphaned. That's the word. They have been orphaned because of illicit drug use. That's illicit drug use alone. We're not talking about alcohol. We're talking about illicit drugs. When it comes to neglect, you've got 81,000 children have been removed in 2021 alone. 81,000. Not in this case, it was alcohol and drugs, alcohol and illicits. And we can't disaggregate that figure, unfortunately.
Understand.
But we do know that about 90% of neglect cases where hard drugs are involved are going to have the child taken away. Whereas if it's alcohol, it's about 60% taken away. So hard drugs are actually doing more damage, being perceived as doing more damage to the child, and thus leading to a greater percentage of kids being taken from those homes as against where alcohol is the main disorder. So, I can go through a whole list of things.
Do it. No, please, we need to hear this, Gary. I think this is really important. Let's be salient. Obviously, the key salient points here. We're not trying to do horror stories here, people. You're listening to this. This is one of the problems we have, is that the voice of those promoting this insanity, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
When we're gonna burn a generation of kids for the sake of recreational drug use. Well, I hate that word. Using illicit psychotropic toxins in a recreational context. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that, Gary. What other salient points are in this document, which is the research? This is evidence-based. Of only one. A lot of the Gary's saying here is only 1 year. We're not talking about, some of it's aggregate over other years. But Gary, tell us more about this, please.
Well, look, I think a starting point, if we're talking US statistics, is that 27% of kids are living in a home where there is a substance use disorder. 27%. Keep that figure in mind.
Yeah, wow.
Of that 27%, you have 10%, not 10% of 27%, but 10% of all US kids are living with illicit drug use as a disorder. All right, so 10% of those kids. Now, these are the ones that get orphaned, okay, the 86,000.
Eventually,
that 10%. You've got, I think it's 72 million kids in the US that actually have the right age group to be called a kid. So you've got to keep those kind of things in mind. When it comes to neglect, 39% of neglect cases are from those substance use disorders. Remember, it was 27%, but neglect cases, it is overrepresented. And that includes alcohol and illicit drugs in this case. But again, I've already cited a figure that drugs are the bigger problem, illicit drugs. When it comes to homelessness, obviously, we have a lot of people who are drug users who become homeless because they cannot control their addiction. And that is also including kids. But there is no specific figure that we actually have on that. We just know that they are overrepresented. That's about the best that we can say. When it comes to sexual and physical abuse, 2.7 times higher than normal families without the drug abuse within those families. That's a figure for alcohol, and we can't disaggregate. So illicit and alcohol as well. Sexual exploitation, we can disaggregate. This is really important. Sexual exploitation. What is it? Article 34 in the rights of the child. They have to be protected from being sexually exploited. That is, they can be used as for prostitution, or they can be used for photos that are taken of them, that kind of thing. That's all sexual exploitation. Now, here's some figures from the US. We know that 50% of the kids who are sexually exploited are suicidal. What percentage of those sexually exploited children are funding the drug use of a parent or caregiver? The biggest study that you have on sexual exploitation in the US finds 75% of all cases. Okay, 75% are funding the drug use of a parent or caregiver.
Let's let that land. 75%. Say it again, Gary. Say it again. Let this land.
75% of all sexual exploitation cases that come before the courts, it has a drug user involved as a caregiver or as a parent. And
that's staggering. That's just staggering.
Yeah, and I've got to put that in the context of the stat that I gave you first. 50% are suicidal. All right, so, there's no harm done to the child. Drugs don't hurt. Drugs don't hurt children. They're fine. 50% are suicidal. That is off another study. So when it comes to hunger, I've actually got to go to Australian stats. They just don't have anything in the US. And we know that in Australia, the figure that I have is 76% of people who are using drugs report some form of food insecurity. All right. So that means that they're going hungry.
Wow.
And 42% have high food insecurity. So they're often going hungry. Now, how many of those people have kids? We can see off the US stats, 100,000 deaths from overdose in the year of 2021, and yet 86,000 kids were left without a caregiver or parent. I don't think Australia is going to be too much different. There are going to be kids who are going to be orphaned and who are going hungry here in Australia in a similar way.
Correct.
And so I think we can generalise those stats.
Well, that's a fair extrapolation. Absolutely, Gary.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's all sorts of other ways in which damage can be done to the child. I'm not giving you everything. Accidental injury. The kids who come from illicit drug use families and alcohol use families have much higher rates, but they don't disaggregate that. When it comes to the chronically ill child, do you think of a drug user who has a child who has epilepsy? Do you think that they are going to give them really good care and be using whatever money they have to be able to give that kid the best future? No, it's going into drugs, right?
Correct.
And so you can see with ADHD, asthma, congenital diseases, heart disease, those kind of things, even autism, those kids need care. Care usually costs money.
Higher level of care, yeah.
Yeah, so the government will kick in a bit, but again, there are a lot of gaps where these kids are going to be left high and dry. So the drug use is affecting them. We can talk about the in utero damage to the child in the first place. Okay, so drugs affecting them before they are born.
Foundational harms. It's awful.
And, we've got a huge list in our document. There'd be, I think, a dozen different particular ways in which in utero damage happens to the unborn child, which is going to severely affect those children when they're born. I won't go through those. We know that these kids are educationally disadvantaged, all right, because there's not the money, they can't get tutors. Another kid may get a tutor if they've got a maths problem, not the kid of an illicit drug user in most every case. And then, of course, you can talk about the road accident victims, kids who've been hit by somebody who's high on cannabis or, some other drug.
Or crystal meth, yeah.
And again, that's not the comprehensive list. So I've just pulled that one a little bit back. No. Yeah, so all of these are damages to the child, and they are caused by illicit drug use. If our society was serious about protecting them from all of those damages, they would actually not be nearly as liberal as what we are here in Australia or in the US.
Yep, absolutely.
Hey, before we continue, we want to highlight an excellent cousin podcast you should definitely check out. Pathways to Prevention with Dave Clausen. Dave brings incredible, proactive and protective insights that really complement the work we're doing here at UHP. That's pathway number 2, prevention. Make sure you subscribe and give it a listen. Now, back to UHP.
And again, thank you for doing that. I just want our listeners to get a snapshot. Now, again, that's a snapshot. The document Gary's talking about will be available, and it will be available in the links of this podcast. But it is extensive, it is evidence-based, and it's thorough. Now, what Gary's also referring to here is a generic term, that's an overarching term, an umbrella term for this, is called adverse childhood experiences. There are 7 listed ones with 3 categories: neglect, abuse, and I forgot the other one. But in the centre of that, one of those 7 adverse childhood experiences is being around drug use. That is one of the 7, but that one particular adverse childhood experience influences directly all the other 6. It's fascinating. Substance use, illicit substance use specifically, but also illicit, including obviously alcohol, creates the problematic issues that deliver the other 6 or amplify, exacerbate, increase, enlarge, whatever you want to say, the other 6 ACEs. So any child welfare operator, any medical operator, doctor, pharmacist, psychiatrist, any policymaker, goodness me, in public health, would look at this and go, why would we allow more of this to take place? Why would we permit, by passive or rearranging rights debates, to allow this to go on? Because it's only adding to the cost. And I want to talk about now, Gary, let's talk about, as much as you can, the ongoing ripple effects. And I hate to drill down into fiscal issues, but unfortunately for a lot of people, at the end of the day, it's how much money is this costing us. But the ongoing damages to families, communities, future education, future productivity. What are some of the, if you can, Gary, what are some of the dynamics in that space?
Yeah, so look, it's quite a while since we've actually had a report done on the cost to the community. Okay, we're not talking children now, but the cost to the community. And, from memory, it was $7 billion back in 2002, so it's going to be that much higher now. Our drug use has been going up since 2007 in Australia, Yep. All right? So drug use has gone on a steady upward curve. And so it's a significant amount of money. You also got to remember that you've got behind the scenes, I did mention George Soros and his 19 billion, whatever it was, that he put into his causes. That's being fed into the media, paying reporters all over Australia, all over the US, to be able to push his social agendas. So when we're talking about money, there is a lot of money that is costing our governments, and at the same time, you've got a lot of government coming in from these billionaires that are pushing their agenda. And you've got to think of 2 aspects of money in this case.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I think you've got and it just beggars belief for me. I mean, I'm going to state the obvious here for listeners. If that social architecture, social manipulation funding from billionaires like Soros and Branson was retasked for prevention, for healthcare, for well-being, imagine a globe, a planet like that, where we'd see families thriving, children growing up, and of course, every time a child has got suicidal ideation, is malnourished, their education capacity is undermined, their genetic capacity is undermined from in utero. All of that compounds as they grow, as compounds in their ability to be productive. And that, again, that's a harsh word in the context we're talking about. But again, all those things add to the fiscal weight that substance use is doing, is putting onto our communities, but particularly our children, and our whole generations are being sacrificed on the altar of hedonism, basically. It's like, I want to get off and I don't give a rip about kids. But the Eindhoven Declaration, this is where this conference in 2025 was wonderful, put together by the One Voice, One Message team. And for people all over the world came to that, and we were there as well. It was great to be part of that. And again, it was a real privilege to be able to sit with you, Gary, and Eze and others, and just be able to add some value to that process. I thought it was fantastic. But the declaration has some clear recommendations. I want to get onto some more proactive things here. We want to see the declaration signed by everybody. Clearly, 193, 196 nations have signed on to the Convention of the Right. 196, is it?
And it is the most ratified convention of every convention, not just the 9 human rights conventions, of all the conventions.
Perfect. So that's been signed on by all those nations. We want to see all those nations sign on to the Eindhoven Declaration. So, Gary, can you give our listeners a couple of key salient recommendations of that declaration? Because I think we could go through all 7 if you want to, but just give us some of the really powerful ones, because I want people to go away saying, I want to be part of this. I want to sign on to this. I want to get this into my community. I want to get this into my network. I want to get this into my tribe, my mob, and see this really, really supported and backed. So tell us about some of the recommendations.
Yeah, so the document, it does address the fact that prevention is the best form of harm reduction. So without saying it, we're calling to question harm reduction as an ideology which doesn't seek recovery. Okay, that's how harm reduction is done within Australia. They don't want these people to recover. They're quite happy to have doctors feeding them a methadone or boop prescription for, decades.
Ad infinitum, yeah.
Yeah. So there's no emphasis on recovery, but prevention is the best form of harm reduction. And so we kind of take a little bit of a swing at harm reduction. And our belief is that harm reduction is okay only as it leads to recovery.
A part of continuum of care. And when it's taken out of that, it's no longer a viable option.
Yeah. The other 6 are basically talking about what we have talked about this morning. Another 5 talk about what we've talked about this morning. One of them says the communities need to empower themselves. Don't think that there is a saviour coming, that you need to be the saviour. You need to step up. You need to say, I'm going to take some kind of responsibility here, and I need to be doing something in this cause. And one of the first steps that you can take is go to the ovum.org, OVOM.org website and sign the declaration. Then get other people to sign the declaration. That's really important. I think we're up to 600, 650 signatures at the moment, but we actually would like to get thousands. And so that is something that you can actually be doing straight away. The last of the recommendations that we have, it deals with the medical use of particular psychotropic drugs. And what we're seeing, and again, George Soros is behind this, is trying to get all sorts of controlled substances. These are drugs that are banned, okay, like psilocybin, magic mushrooms, MDMA, ecstasy. These are not legal drugs. They're trying to get these passed off as medical medications, if you like, and having medical properties. And so they've got all of these trials going on all over the world with psilocybin. They've got MDMA. They're saying, it helps you with PTSD. Now, PTSD is one of those things that you cannot actually, as a doctor, when somebody presents to you and says, I got PTSD, you can't measure for it. Okay, it's all something which is in their head. It's like chronic pain. They can't measure it, and so you just got to go off and say, the person must have PTSD because they told me so. That may not be the case. They may just be making it up so that they can get access, for instance, at the moment, to medical cannabis. Yeah. And this is the model that you see that the Soros-funded organisations are pushing throughout the US, We've got these medical uses for
in
these
Australia.
substances. And you're going to need them for chronic pain. You're going to need them for PTSD. And currently, Sydney University has been doing psilocybin. There's magic mushrooms. They've actually been doing that. And you can see how they are coaching the people in their trial. They've got this trial that's happening at Sydney University, and they sit them down for a full day, before they actually administer the psilocybin. And they tell them all the things that they should expect. 8 hours of coaching. Yeah. And even then, you've still got people coming out the other end of their treatment. They're saying, I got paranoid and, I don't want to keep taking them. But, they've had all this coaching as to what to say at the end. And but they are getting results, So I think it was 30+% were benefiting with their PTSD. Again, you don't know whether they've really got PTSD or whether they're just saying it because they want to be on a trial that's got magic mushrooms. Who knows? So there's a lot.
It's a game. It's a game.
There's a lot of game playing, and unfortunately, that's the case.
Yeah, we've seen that, and of course, Delgado has been following the research on this for a while. Again, this is a Trojan horse idea. No one's protesting the correct pharmaceutical, science-based, evidence-based, thorough, clinically trialled pursuit of medicines for the health and well-being of populations. But we're talking about substances, cannabis, MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, all we experimented with previously, all disastrous in the end. They were all delisted and written off. But then they come back with a new story, a new narrative, a new, a fantastic machine of propaganda behind it. And then, of course, you get the media on board, and then all of a sudden it's like the noise, and then you wheel out the felt need brigade. And again, some of them can be genuine. I'm not arguing that. And for those listeners who are out there listening to us who are in this space of recovery, you know what I'm talking about. The felt need can be very demanding, but the real need isn't being met. So all you do is mask it rather with a substance or an experience rather than actually dealing with it. And these substances have proven to not really be curative. Well, they can't be curative. And even therapeutically, they're creating their own problems. Gary just said, people coming out even worse than they went in. So again, these experiments that are happening because an agenda, an ideology is driving this. We want to normalize illicit substance use so that we can act on it and use it with impunity in our communities, and to hell with anybody else who gets in our way. And it's been a well-funded agenda. But yeah, Gary, you're going to speak to that.
You've got to remember who's behind this push. I've mentioned one particular character, but he's joined by a whole lot of other billionaires. And now what's their agenda?
Yeah, it's a worldview issue, and there's no argument there. I think anthropologically speaking, and it's a battle for the worldviews. Which worldview, and which anthropologically sound worldview is sustainable and for best practice for human beings. And of course, if we're going to disrupt the existing order, we have to come in with chaos, and that's what these guys are trying to do. Gary, the One Voice, One Message, OVOM.org is the website. And on there, you click on that. We've done that. It's part of our WRD News. It's on our WRD News platform. It's on our website. But if you want to go to OVOM.org and click on the Eindhoven Declaration, we encourage you not just to look at it and sign it. Of course, do that, add to it. But begin to, as Gary mentioned before in his comments, about there's no saviour coming. You are the community that you're in. You're the one who crafts its values. You're the one who crafts its capacity to protect, to nurture, to grow. And part of that is keeping out the bad actors and keeping out the bad policy processes. So I encourage you to take that declaration, go to your members, to politicians, to leaders in your community, and get them to understand what's going on from their perspective. This prevention is the best way forward. Prevention is the key to everything, and that the lobby behind this, the pro-drug activism behind this, is only unraveling their communities and families worse and worse. And all the problems that stem from that, the attending issues, healthcare, safety, community well-being, it's all going to be unraveled because of this issue. So this is just a no-brainer. It's just a no-brainer. But we really want to encourage you to get on to that. Gary, anything else you want to just really push into that space before we leave?
Yeah, look, one of the current things that we are just fighting at the moment, and I have a meeting on Microsoft Teams or meetings or whatever it is tomorrow with the New South Wales Department of Roads. This shows you the craziness of what's going on with illicit drug use. Our government at the moment is trying to get a particular threshold for cannabis patients to be able to drive with cannabis in their system. Now, we actually know from the examples of Colorado and Washington that if you allow loose laws around driving with cannabis in the system, that you're going to more than double your deaths as a percentage of all road deaths that come from cannabis driving. And 230% they went up against only a 54% rise in drug use over a 10-year period in Colorado. This is, in other words, it's 4.5 times overrepresented. This is craziness. And yet our New South Wales government wants to allow and be lax with cannabis driving patients, all for compassion. So it just shows you how powerful the lobbies are behind all of this, that you can do something which is so totally insane. And hopefully we can stop this legislation going through because the science is totally against it.
Correct.
And, we're just going to have to see what unfolds tomorrow. So I just mentioned that one just as an example of how crazy things are when you've got big money out there forcing their agendas on politicians.
Correct. We actually call that the new reefer madness. That's what that is. It's the new reefer madness. People say, you people are reefer mad. No, the new reefer madness is what Gary's talking about. The denial of evidence, the reframing of issues completely into a crazy space.
No. Yep.
The insanity of drug use continues, and of course that's not to be denigrating of those who are caught in the tyranny of addiction, because that's a different animal, and we want to see them off the addiction and out of it and set free from that. But of course we want to prevent anyone ever cascading into that space, and the way you do that is with prevention, not permission models. Gary Christian, thank you for joining us on the Unnecessary Harm podcast. It's been really, really good. We will be obviously in the follow-up to this on the line and all our presentations. The documents Gary spoke to, obviously the declaration itself will be there for you to look at. And until next time, as always, let's avoid unnecessary harm wherever we can and be advocates for proactivity that stops unnecessary harm from happening in the first place. Until then, be safe, be well.
As we wrap up today's session, remember, each step towards understanding is a step away from unnecessary harm. We're here to empower, inspire, and pave the way for optimal well-being. Stay resilient, stay informed, and continue being the change your community needs. Thank you for joining us at the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Until next time, take care and keep pushing forward.